To get started, we thought it only made sense to start with the origin of Sika deer and how a Japanese deer made its way all the way to the eastern shore of Maryland. So to start out, Sika deer are a non-native cervid species that come all the way from East Asia and the Japanese archipelago. There's a total of 14 different subspecies that are widely recognized, but the smallest of the subspecies is what you'll find here in Maryland. So their scientific name is Cervus nippon yakushime from the small island of Yakushima in southern Japan. Sika arrived in Maryland in the early 1900s as a gift, if you can believe that. The Duke of Bedford from England thought that it would be a good idea to bring over 5 to 6 privately owned individuals, and they were later released onto James Island. So for those of you who aren't familiar with James Island, it's a 113 hectare island south of the Choptank River drainage in the Chesapeake Bay. Unfortunately, it is now mostly underwater, but Sika deer have made their way out of there since then. They have since swam to the mainland of Dorchester County, Maryland, where they established a population in the marshlands and have spread throughout the lower Delmarva Peninsula. And now the current population is estimated to be between 10 to 20,000 individuals. So they've expanded quite a bit since those original 5 or 6. The core breeding range is Dorchester, Wicomico, and Somerset counties, but the population has expanded into several other counties in Maryland and Delaware. We have a map on the next slide to just walk everybody through the timeline of that expansion and how they moved throughout the peninsula. And then there's another small population I'm sure many of you are familiar of that is on Assateague Island, and they kind of have their own funny origin story. They were established after a Boy Scout troop released several outside of Ocean City, Maryland in the 20s. So these guys are full of some funny origin stories with how they came to Maryland and spread throughout. So for the range timeline, as you can see, we have a nice map here of the Delmarva Peninsula. Our blue colored areas are the breeding populations where they've expanded throughout the peninsula. And then all of the other places you see in yellow are just areas where there have been Sika sightings or harvests. In those areas, we're not sure how many individuals there are. We just know that they are there. We don't know the exact amount. So just to go through the timeline of expansion once again, in 1916 is when they first landed in James Island. 1954, they made their way a little south to Taylor's Island, and then at that point also swam to Dorchester's mainland. By 1962, they had taken up the western third of Dorchester County, and then by 2021, they had fully expanded across the peninsula. So as you can see again, all the different places where the breeding population expanded to, reaching various counties and even reaching a small part of Delaware as well. So they know how to move across the peninsula, that's for sure. A big reason that they've been so successful throughout the Delmarva Peninsula is because they have a unique characteristic within their diet, which is the abundance of saltwater and freshwater marsh species that they're able to consume. So they're able to do this because they can metabolize a large amount of fiber, which makes their diet more flexible than other cervids. So in comparison to whitetail, they can eat a larger variety of vegetation and still perform the same on what we would say is a lower quality diet, which is really, really good for their performance throughout the year. In 2015, our lab was actually able to figure out what the breakdown of their diet was within these 4 categories during the winter. And the reason we were interested in what they were consuming in the winter is because that's when food is most scarce and where there would be the most competition for vegetation. So between the 4 categories that we look at within their diet, the breakdown during the winter ended up being 1 to 3% forbs, 42 to 47% grasses, 12 to 16% sedges and rushes, and then 38 to 40% woody browse. Additionally, similar to whitetails, Sika can also be found responsible for crop depredation on soybeans and corn, and that's because it's a valuable food source for them during the growing seasons. So May through September is when you find Sika deer eating quite a bit. Their nutrition requirement is highest. They're, freshly postpartum, just given birth to calves. They're lactating. They're preparing for rut in the winter. So they definitely need plenty of food to be successful, and soybeans and corn represent a lot of nutrients for them during that time. So something we like to think about when approaching the conservation of a species is recognizing all of the things that we already know about this species so that we can find the knowledge gaps that remain. And it's been really nice to look over everything that we've been able to study about Sika deer over the course of the last 100 years. We have been able to learn quite a bit. So just to start with their genetics, like mentioned before, their established population originated from 5 to 6 individuals. So you can imagine that their gene pool is unfortunately pretty shallow, but this has only led to a loss of neutral genetic variations, which is mutations that don't really help or harm the organism, excuse me. But no physical abnormalities exist in association with inbreeding. So their genetics are stable within the population. Diet, we already discussed their physical description and age. So in the winter, Sika can be found with a dark chestnut brown coat, which will turn lighter reddish brown in the summer. Some characteristics that make them easy to identify are the dark stripe running down their spine, the white spots along their body. They have a large white patch on their rump, and then their body size is also a major identifier. So adult body mass can range from 30 to 40 kilograms, with larger individuals reaching 45 plus kilograms. And then at shoulder height, they're between 78 to 84 centimeters on average. Adult males or stags, they reach a maximum body size between 5.5 and 7.5 years old. And then adult females or hinds will reach their maximum size earlier at about 4.5 or 5.5 years old. Sika antler growth is very fun to look into. So similar to other cervids, their antlers begin growing in May, harden in August. They use them as they need to for the rut, and those antlers are retained until spring when they eventually shed them. So if you're ever walking around Blackwater Wildlife Refuge, keep your eyes peeled for sheds, because you can find those antlers. And yeah, it's really fascinating to see. Also, stags typically live 1.5 to 3.5 years. Hinds can live 1.5 to 5.5 years, but these lifespans are mainly based on hunter harvest. So we do have documentation of individuals living to 20 plus years, but due to hunter harvest, we just have an average lifespan of the 1.5 to 3.5, and then for hinds, 1.5 to 5.5. So for vocalizations, Sika deer are actually one of the most vocal cervids. So they have upwards of 10 different vocalizations, but the most common one that you'll hear year round is their alarm call, which can be just best described as a short scream. I recommend that everybody go on YouTube after this presentation and just look up various Sika vocalizations, because it is very hard to describe. But definitely worth listening and finding on YouTube. And then during rut, stags will do what we call a roar. It's not your typical roar, it's just an elongated and very dramatic sound, more so than the short alarm or alert short scream that they do. And then finally, the hinds also communicate with their calves using goat-like bleats. So those are the most common vocalizations that you'll come across when observing Sika deer. And then for spatial ecology and habitat use, on the Delmarva, Sika are typically found in freshwater and saltwater marshes, but they also spend time in surrounding cropland and forests. So movement and spatial use research has become a fairly recent priority in the last few years. So Andrew and I will go into it further as we tell you all about recently completed and upcoming projects that we have. And on the note of recently completed projects is the reproductive ecology. So our lab just finished collecting data for the reproductive ecology project that Andrew is leading. So we'll segue into telling you guys about that now. So for the repro project, the study area was in Dorchester and Wicomico County, Maryland, seen here in the circled red. As mentioned, these two locations encompass the core deer population that is present on the Delmarva Peninsula. So the percentage of forest and wetlands is roughly 46%. Agricultural land use is 42%, and the remaining land use is development. So here, Sika deer utilize thick cover found in woodlands, flooded forests, and marshes, especially novel habitats invaded by frag or Phragmites australis. And for this project, we conducted fieldwork on private land, public state land, and Blackwater Wildlife National Refuge.
Thank you, Rebecca. So the main objectives of the project that Rebecca and I are currently working on, the reproductive ecology project. First off, we use GPS collars and vaginal implant transmitters to track the hind movement. Hind is an adult Sika deer, a female Sika deer. And then we use vaginal implant transmitters or VITs to try to find neonates around the time of birth. So our first objective is to see whether VITs are a useful tool in researching Sika deer on the Delmarva Peninsula. This is the first study that has ever used VITs and paired with GPS collars to research Sika deer in this region. Our second objective is to document mortalities of calves and then cause-specific causes of mortality. Then we estimate the age-specific and sex-specific survival rates of calves for the first 90 days of life. And then we'll be looking at spatial ecology and hind parturition movement. So looking at GPS data for 6 weeks pre and postpartum to compare that to other known cervid species. So to start out, our field season starts in January, and the trapping of adults will go from January until the end of March. And to do that, we use clover traps, which are large box traps, rocket nets, and drop nets that are all baited with whole kernel corn. When we catch a deer, we'll release non-target deer, so anything that's not an adult, not a female. And then we'll chemically immobilize the adult females using a drug called Nalmed A. And then we'll do our full workup. So we'll take morphometric measurements. We'll insert a VIT, collar, ear tag, draw blood from the jugular vein, and then release the deer after that with another chemical agent. So during our processing time, we'll monitor for respiration and heart rate and internal temperature every 5 minutes. The workups don't last more than 30 minutes. And yeah, it's a pretty fast-paced workup time. So this is the data that we'll get for the whole season. So we'll collar an animal from January to March. And then the collar will stay on until the end of August or September. That way we can track its movements throughout the entire period of the spring and then find the calf. This picture is just a conglomerate of all the points from that period of time from January until September, showing where the Sika deer, this is an individual deer, but where this Sika deer had moved around. You can see in the left center area where there's a giant cluster of white points is where this particular hind gave birth. So there's a lot more movement data in that area, but you can see utilizing marsh habitat and then going to the right side of the picture, a lot of ag fields and pinelands. And so in May, In June, which is the peak of calving, we'll go out and try to find um, the VITs and find the calves. So a VIT will send an alert to the hind collar saying that it expelled, which gives us a birth date for the calf, and then we'll go out with radio telemetry and search for the VIT. Once we find the birth site, then we'll search around the birth site for the calf. Oftentimes, you can see the picture on the right, the calf is very well hidden. They're about the size of a loaf of Wonder Bread, so very small. Especially trying to find that in Phragmites marsh is sometimes a challenge. And then once we catch the calves, we'll put a linked calf collar that's expandable on the calf, and then we'll ear tag it, take measurements, and then release it. The calf collar is linked to the hind collar, so they communicate back and forth. And that's how we will know. One of the ways that we'll know if the calf died or not. So we do daily checks with radio telemetry. The telemetry on the collar will have a certain cadence for an alive signal, and then it will change if it's dead. So it'll be faster. You can hear it with the radio telemetry, and then we go in and find that. So any mortalities that we recovered, we take it to the University of Pennsylvania Veterinary Clinic to get a full necropsy and determine the cause of death. So just a quick overview. Over the last 2 years, we had very good success with VITs and finding calves. This past year, we had 24 VITs successfully work where we found a calf. In 2024, we collared 20 calves, and in 2025, we collared 21. So we have a total of 41 calves collared, and that doesn't include, we found a few stillbirths and some that had drowned the day of parturition, just from being born in a marsh with a king tide. So the data analysis for the survival shows that there's a 71% survival probability for the first 90 days of life, which is very high for cervid species. Um, Typically, a lot of studies find, like whitetail studies in the East, find that whitetail neonates don't survive nearly as much as this. It's usually 50 to 40%. So Sika are doing pretty well as neonates. And as I said earlier, we collared a total of 41 calves. We got 62 hinds over the last 2 years. We've only found 15 documented calf mortalities. The leading cause was unknown natural, so that was either predation that we couldn't determine was exact cause of death, but when we found the calf, it was heavily scavenged, or just like the necropsy didn't come through with a definitive cause of death. We also found that there's about a 1-to-1 ratio of male to females being born over our study period. So overall, we've learned a lot about Sika deer neonates. We've learned, for one, that they are a lot more mobile than people had suspected right out from birth. We found many Sika deer calves that were hundreds of yards away from the birth site, or when we were trying to go in to find them, we could hear the hind moving them away, hear them tromping through the water, running away. Whitetail and elk, I've never seen that happen in either species. So Sika deer are pretty well adapted to surviving in the marsh from day one. We've even found a couple different instances where Sika were swimming on the first day of life. We also found that although there wasn't statistically significant difference in male to female mortality rates within the first 90 days, there was biological significance with only 3 female calf mortalities over the 2 years, and then 9 male mortalities. And almost all mortalities occurred within the first 20 days of life. Also, this picture up here is the progression of the vaginal implant transmitters throughout different projects from the early 90s until about now. The one on the far right is the one that we use for this project. So slight modifications, but it's a pretty useful tool to use for research in neonates. So yeah, with that, we'd like to thank Maryland Department of Natural Resources because they're a huge funder of this project. Blackwater National Wildlife Refuge, we work closely with their crew. They provide housing for our team. There's plenty of people that have spent countless hours trying to catch deer in the winter and in the summer in Maryland. Lots of volunteers, lots of undergraduates coming out. And then there's been several landowners and hunt clubs that have allowed us to have access to their properties to trap deer.
So with that, the final piece that we just wanted to touch on is what's left for us to learn about Sika deer. And the next priority for us is to look into Sika and whitetail competition. So we'll have a project starting this January. It'll be a 3-year study, and similar to the reproductive study, we'll be capturing and collaring both adult female Sika deer and adult female whitetails. So really fun new territory for us to discover. Yeah, we're really excited to look into it. The specific objectives are going to be to look at movement, habitat use, competition, and survival. So wish us luck with that, and hopefully we can come back and tell you more about what we find in a year or so. Now
So
for
with
the
that,
fun part. Does anybody have
yeah,
questions?
any questions?
Yeah, well, this was great. Let's share, come back. I'll put a spotlight on y'all, and we'll open it up to Q&A. Hold on a second.
Awesome. Also, I did just want to show I have a VIT with me just for scale and the size of them to make it, I don't know if that makes it any more clear, but just a fun little visual. Oh,
Oh, we're
spotlight.
Spotlight. All right, as you know, you can put your questions in the chat box, or you can raise your hand, and I'll call on you to unmute. So we have Jackie. Do Sika occur in mainland Virginia?
They don't. They're on Chincoteague and Assateague. There could be transients, but I don't think there's been any documentation of them being on mainland Virginia.
All right. Mark asked, do Sika and whitetail interbreed?
No.
Mm-mm.
They're two different genus. So Autocoilus and Cervus can't interbreed. Sika can interbreed with things like elk, red stags, but not things like whitetail or mule deer.
Okay. So it's interesting because we often hear about non-native invasive animals, and this Sika deer is a non-native deer, comes from Japan area or Asia. As Grace asks, are they invasive? Do they want to get rid of them? Are they causing problems?
I think it depends on who you ask in terms of the problems. The state does the best that they can to manage the population so that all of the potential risks of them doing damage to the ecosystem can be prevented that way. But in terms of crop depredation, that's a real issue for farmers in the area, that their populations are pretty well established. But that's the main concern that I've heard. And Andrew, did you have anything to add to that one?
No, I think Sika are a regionally important game species now especially in Dorchester and Wacomico County. So the main goal for MDNR is to prevent the spread of the population, but to maintain it at a cultural carrying capacity. so that it can be sustainably harvested, but that it's not overtaking native whitetail range. Because right now we're seeing a lot of Sika deer habitat and whitetail deer habitat. They do overlap, but Sika are using a lot more of that marginal marshland than whitetail are. So, yeah, back to what Rebekah said, it's kind of based off of who you ask.
Mhm.
But a lot of people like Sika and want them to stay because they bring a lot of money in for just like the hunting alone, but
Mhm.
Well, we
also
have a couple,
wildlife viewing.
yeah, we have a couple of questions on the hunting that that's kind of a good segue in there. Are there limits in terms of Sika deer hunting? What is the hunting season, and does it overlap with the whitetail hunting season?
All great questions. And these are all things that you can find on the DNR website in terms of what the regulations are for certain hunting tags, certain wildlife management areas, because there's very specific rules for where you can hunt publicly, and then also depending on what tag, what weapon season you're choosing to hunt. So there's a lot of different answers for those questions, and very easy to navigate charts online that can give you those answers.
There, the limits for Sika hunting would be 3, with one not being more than, or there's 3 for each season. So there's 3 tags in archery, and one can be a stag, and then the other 2 have to be hinds, and then 3 for main rifle, and then 3 for a late muzzleloader. So overall, if you wanted to fill all of the tags that you could get 9 Sika, 3 of them being stags. They have to be spread out between each weapon season. So archery, rifle, and muzzleloader season.
All right. So Dennis is asking about plants. They say the Sika use Phragmites for cover? Are they eating the Phragmites? And does the Sika food preference pose any threats to plant biodiversity? So we're going back to that invasiveness issue.
Yeah, so it has been documented that Sika do use Phragmites as a food source. Mostly they're using it for cover. This subspecies, like Rebekah said, is from a small island that is altitudinally ranged with vegetation. So they're mostly found above 1,800 meters on this island, which is covered in an endemic bamboo species grassland. So it's very similar in cover style to what the marshes are in Maryland. So I think they're selecting the habitat based off of the Phragmites cover rather than it being like a marsh. I don't think they really prefer that it's wet. I think the cover is just better. And as far as plant biodiversity, I think the bigger issue is the invasion of Phragmites rather than the presence of Sika deer. Sika deer will kind of eat everything, but Phragmites is really kind of wiping out a lot of biodiversity in the forest ecosystems found in these areas. So I would say the Sika are probably not contributing to lower plant biodiversity in the way that Phragmites is, or even water table level rise, sea level rise.
All right. Ben is asking, do Sika get chronic wasting disease from white-tailed deer?
No. I don't, there hasn't been any documented cases of Sika CWD from the wild populations, but there has been a case in what do you call it, Andrew?
Captive.
Yeah, captive. There has been a documented case.
Yeah, Sika can get CWD. There's just not CWD in the region that Sika are found yet. There's CWD and whitetails in Western Maryland, but it just hasn't reached the Delmarva Peninsula.
Okay. Gregory asks, your map says they are not found in Accomack County proper. why haven't they been spotted south of that line? Is it just because it's a state line, so those counts haven't been included in your data, or is there another reason?
I need to look at a map to see where that's at.
What I can say though about the population or the map that we did have established, the thought is that they did a lot of following of the Nanticoke to spread the way that they did. But beyond that,
Okay, I see. So, what's the question? I think the south of the line, meaning on mainland Maryland, is just to clarify.
Gregory, do you want to clarify that? Are you looking at mainland Maryland or still in the Delmarva? I don't know.
So what I'm looking at on the map, it looks like, again, I'm not familiar with this part of Virginia, but Accomack County is the southern tip of the Delmarva Peninsula. So it looks like they could colonize that portion of the peninsula from Chincoteague. One thing that I'll have to say about that is Chincoteague does manage their Sika pretty heavily. The other is Sika on the mainland, like Dorchester, Wacomico counties, have not traveled that far south on the Delmarva Peninsula because, like Rebekah was saying, they're following a lot of waterways, so they're more moving up towards Sussex County, Delaware, rather than down the coast. And if you would look at a map, you can see the watershed is kind of all pulling in right towards the Blackwater National Wildlife Refuge coming out of Salisbury. So they're kind of radiating that way more than they are straight south. I hope that answers a question.
I have a question about, you mentioned that James Island isn't there anymore because it has sunk or flooding, that you have sea level rise, you have land subsiding in that area, and inundation happening. Are you seeing that the populations of Sika deer are moving north?
Well, I don't even think there's any Sika on James Island anymore because that island is basically sandbars. But they are moving kind of northeast, like I said, about following the waterways. I'm not convinced that that's because of sea level rise, just more so habitat availability, and they spread pretty fast. I mean, especially the dispersing juvenile males, they'll travel pretty long distance. So I think sea level rise definitely influences the habitat that they're using, but I don't think it's pushing them out of anywhere yet. It probably will. But if anything, I think it's creating more habitat where there's flooded timberlands that are getting invaded with Phragmites because those areas maybe 50 years ago didn't have substantial water. And now the only thing that can colonize those vegetation-wise would be Phragmites. So it might actually be making more habitat for Sika at the moment.
and I think there's curiosity about how it's moving the whitetail out of those habitats. So we're hoping to learn about that in the upcoming study.
Great.
Mhm.
Grace wants to know, what about you mentioned a little bit about it, the characteristics of their native habitat in Japan. Is it similar to our habitat? Is the climate similar to our habitat? Is it aquatic and marshy? Because they seem to be doing a great job there. Here.
You want to answer that, or do you want me to?
You go ahead.
Yeah, so it's really not marshy at all. There's hardly any marsh on the island of Yakushima. Like I said earlier, the endemic bamboo grasslands higher up on the like 1,800 meters and higher kind of mimics the cover of the Phragmites. And I think temporally it's pretty similar. I think it's a little bit more like subtropical. Um, but it's a pretty rugged mountainous island, so it's very different from Delmarva. And then the forest type is like beaches and mixed forest, mixed conifer forest. So yeah, it's pretty different. But there's, like Rebecca said, there's 14 different subspecies of Sika, and a lot of them live on mainland Asia and China and Russia, southern Russia. And there are areas where Sika live in those places that are more similar to the Delmarva Peninsula.
Have you been able to visit Yakushima to
No,
see them?
What a
I
dream
would,
that would be.
I don't know. I would love to go over there and see them in their native range, but
Mhm.
it's very expensive.
Are there seasonal, Dennis wants to know, are there seasonal differences in their range? I mean, we did see it going back and forth a little bit in that picture.
Yeah, that's a good question. So what we've kind of been able to see is there's three different movement patterns that we've seen the deer do. So some deer tend to stick at one range year round. Then there's another group that has two different ranges that they'll spend winter and summer. And then we have a third group that's kind of just a nomad and they don't stop moving. So it kind of depends on the given individual and what kind of habitat that they're in. But that's what we've seen in terms of differences for seasonal ranges and movement throughout the year.
And Timothy wants to know what their average home range is in square miles.
It varies a lot. Um, so it can be 1 square mile or um, 1 square mile. It could be, I only know the hectares, so it could be 4,000 hectares. It really, it varies a lot, especially between sexes. So hinds especially older hinds that have well-established um, core habitat areas are not moving very much, probably less than a square mile. Um, but then, like I said, juvenile males that are dispersing will be traveling a lot. And I think a lot of those instances where people were seeing them up in Cecil County or further up in Delaware is because of those dispersing juvenile males. So I think once they've established a core area, it's not very big, especially in areas where they're um, fed. So baiting is legal for hunting in Maryland. So a lot of people that have private land will bait year round. So that's really keeping like high concentrations of Sika deer in areas where their movement might only be 500 square meters. Um, that might be a little bit of an exaggeration, but there's areas where Sika are not moving very much at all, especially when they have the cover and the food.
Yeah, that's been one of the more interesting things that we've gotten to see over the course of the last few years is just how variable their movement is. And for every given reason that it is so variable. And, anytime that we chemically immobilize a deer, we'll give it an ear tag. And then if that deer is harvested, we hope to get a call from the hunter that harvests it just to hear about where that deer is and get more data on the individual animal. And we've heard of, I think it was maybe a 1.5-year-old stag, 2.5 maybe, and he was harvested 13 miles away from where he was captured, which was really exciting data for us. And then there's other times that we get phone calls of, a hind being harvested 200 meters away from where we captured her. So super variable and really fun for us to learn about.
Do you think that because this population is so isolated in terms of geography as well as genetics that it could be forming a new subspecies or species?
I think in the term of geologic time, it could eventually, but they've only been in Maryland for about 100 years, so that's definitely not enough time um, to see that or to even guess. I think if they were here for thousands of years, that would probably end up happening. But yeah, as of now, they're pretty genetically similar to the main or the native range Sika. That's how they figured out where they came from. They did genetic sampling a couple years ago and traced it back to populations in England and then different privately owned populations throughout Europe that came from this island in Japan. So they're not really diverging genetically, especially because they've gone through at least two bottleneck effects, and this is a founder population, so their genetic variability is extremely low.
I gotcha. And oh, I just forgot what my question was. Anybody else have a question while I try to
I
remember?
have a question. I couldn't figure out how to type in the thing.
Okay, go ahead, Preston.
I'm wondering why the antlers of some types of moose or deer are like soft and feel like felt sort of. I'm wondering why do some horns have that that like fuzzy feeling to them.
It's a good question.
Yeah.
So that fuzzy skin is called velvet. When antlers are growing, antlers are the fastest growing bone in the animal kingdom, so they grow once a year. So like this will grow from throughout one season. So it'll grow like in the spring, it'll start after it sheds, and then in the spring the next year it will fall off. So they have to have a lot of blood vessels that go to that bone. So it's covered in that velvet so that it has a lot of blood flow and a lot of nutrients go to it. And then when rut happens, or the roar, or whatever you want to call it, when they start breeding, that's triggered mostly off of photoperiods. So difference in light, the bone will start to harden, and then the velvet will start to peel off. And that's why the antlers then look like this rather than being fuzzy. So the velvet is just protecting like the soft bone that's growing really, really fast. And all cervids have that. So anything from a Sika deer to a giant moose paddle will all grow within 1 year, and they'll all be covered in velvet, which will then come off, and then the antler will shed, and then the cycle will go again.
I did not know that. That is very interesting.
It is. Dennis asks, is the trapping process dangerous for you, the researcher? Do you get kicked or bitten?
Well, first off, thanks for looking out for us.
Yeah.
It can be dangerous, but we go through extensive training, and of course there's a bunch of paperwork involved so that everyone's best interest is looked out for. Our main priority is to look out for the safety of the deer that we're working with, and keeping all of our crew safe as well. But everyone's got their go-to story about their worst kick or bite experience, but kind of just comes with the territory and excitement of what we get to do with them.
Yeah, we take safety very seriously. So we have about a month of training, really getting into the nitty-gritties of how all of the equipment works and handling the drug safely, handling the animal safely, using the trapping equipment properly. Yeah, I'm a bit of a hard ass when it comes to safety, Rebekah can tell you. So we take it very seriously. There is risk, but we haven't had any, knock on wood, we haven't had any issues. They do bite though,
Good.
which is funny.
Have you been bitten? Have either of y'all been bitten by a Sika deer?
Oh yeah. They like to go for the neck for some reason.
Yeah.
Nice. How much is known about chronic wasting disease in wild Sika? This is another one about chronic wasting disease elsewhere that can be drawn on here if and when it is detected in our population.
Yeah, so I don't know of any instances where CWD is prevalent in the environment where Sika deer are also established. So there's three different populations in the United States. There's a small one in Kentucky. There's a larger population in Texas. And then there's the one in the Delmarva Peninsula. I'm not sure if there is any CWD prevalence at all in those three populations. I have not read anything about CWD being in any of those populations. The only thing I've heard about is in privately owned captive Sika deer. So the transmission is possible. I mean, CWD is transmitted between different native deer species, so elk and whitetails, in areas that CWD is prevalent and those two species interact. So yeah, it's possible that they can get it, but I haven't heard anything about wild ones getting CWD in the United States.
All right, Alan, you got your hand up. What you got?
Oh, you know what I got, but yeah, I won't ask about the vampire Sika deer, you know. Um, but my standard question for you is just going back as far as you want to go back. How did your interest in doing this work or in animals, you know, how did that come about for both of you?
That's
You
a
want to go
great
first?
question. No, you
Yeah,
can.
it is a great question. Making us reflect, Alan. So I think for me, working with animals, I always knew I wanted to do it in some capacity. I grew up in a suburb. I did not know wildlife research was a career path. All I knew about was veterinary medicine, so I went that route and decided that I didn't enjoy being inside all day, but I still really enjoyed the animal science. And throughout my college career, became a lot more interested in the natural sciences and evolution and all of that just through curriculum. So I decided to jump into technician work and really learn everything through field work. And really, I was very fortunate with really talented mentors along the way. Shout out Andrew, and was able to learn quite a lot. And yeah, so everything worked out for me in that way. And fell in love with doing work with ungulates in particular when I was in Idaho doing CWD work and just seeing they're just a really resilient group of animals. So I wanted to learn about them as much as I could. And technician work brought me to Sika deer. So I think I'm stuck in it for a while.
Yeah, at least 3 more years.
Yeah.
Um, I feel, well, first off, for anyone that doesn't know, technician work is just referring to seasonal field experiences that are, you're basically doing all the field work for a project for a couple months or a year, and then you move on to a different project. So it's how a lot of people in this field get a lot of experience pretty quickly. You spend a couple years jumping around the country or even internationally doing different field jobs where you're studying different groups of animals, or there's endless options, so you can kind of follow whatever path that you want. So I guess I grew up hunting and trapping and fishing and just being outside all the time, so I kind of always felt drawn to being outside and working with animals, being with animals. And so I didn't really think of any other options other than doing something with wildlife. Um, and I had a family friend growing up that was a turtle biologist. So I would like kind of get the inside scoop about what being a biologist meant. So I started out working with him when I was a freshman in college, I think. Realized that I do not like turtles too much, and I'm severely allergic to like some sort of plant in bog turtle habitats. Um, but I kind of always knew I wanted to work with large mammals and started doing different technician jobs and volunteering and just being available to do different things when people had the opportunity that I could jump on, whether that was rocket netting turkeys or um, catching squirrels and like putting pit tags in them. So I just kind of tried to do as much as I could, and then started getting jobs that kind of created a positive feedback loop where I was like getting a good job that I really liked, And then there was someone that I knew within that job that was like, oh, you should apply for this. The wildlife field is very small, so everyone kind of knows everyone, whether it's like one or two people removed or you've worked with them in the past. So yeah, I think I wasn't really expecting to get into graduate school because I wasn't looking to be in graduate school, but it kind of just fell into place that way, and I'm extremely happy with the project that we're in right now. Learned a lot. It's been a lot of intense field work, which I really like. Um, Lots of learning opportunities and teaching opportunities. And so, yeah, I hope to stick with large mammals, especially ungulates.
Great. Thanks so much. And Preston, I'm hoping to be around, to ask you this question in 20 years. So,
Us too. We'll be back asking Preston questions.
It all started with pizza.
Yeah. I have a couple of, the question is with the volunteer stuff that you mentioned, are you actively looking for volunteers? And if we had people that are members of the society who are interested in helping out, how would they do that?
So my project, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say my project is over with field work. So I'm not doing any more stuff, but Rebekah's coming up with that. So go ahead.
Yeah, so for this next 3-year project, volunteers are always welcome. It would just involve having an initial conversation with me to see where everyone's interest lies with the project. But a lot of the field work is at night and very long hours, just depends on when the deer come in. So yeah, definitely open to volunteers. It's a great help, but yeah.
All right, so we'll be in touch with that. And then you mentioned the Boy Scouts. How did Boy Scouts get their hands on Sika deer in the first place to then release them in Ocean City?
So they were
the
purchased. Sorry, what was that?
We want the backstory.
Okay. So when Clement Henry had those, we're not sure if it was 5 or 6 that they released on the James Island. He had them as pets for a while and then released them. There was another just private landowner that bought some from the James Island population and then transported them, I think, to Berlin, Maryland. So had them in Berlin for a bit. And then the leader of the Boy Scout troop ended up buying some for a roadside attraction outside in Ocean City. And so they were just kind of passed back and forth, people buying them, using them as pets or whatever. And then the novelty, I think, wore off. And then the Boy Scout troop released them, and they basically just swam across to the island, to Assateague Island, and established there. What's interesting though is the Assateague Island deer don't typically swim from the barrier island over to the mainland. I'm sure there's an occasional transient, but for the most part, they're sticking to the island. But yeah, the transport was basically just random people that wanted to own Sika deer, heard about Clement Henry's population, and just was like buying them from him.
Gotcha. And do white-tailed deer, are they as good as swimmers as the Sika deer, or is there any or one or the other? Or
I really don't know. I mean, I know that whitetails can swim, and I've seen a couple Sika swim. I don't know if I would say they're like super good, any better than a whitetail, but yeah, I don't know what makes them more prone to be like, maybe it's just the habitat is making them time for deer swimming.
I agree.
I think the habitat is just making them have to adapt to being in water all the time. So I don't think they're necessarily better swimmers than whitetails. I think they just encounter instances where they have to swim a lot more.
So before Robin put what she put in the chat there, I was wondering whether is there interaction between the ponies and the deer on Assateague there?
Yeah, I'm sure there are interactions. Because I know the ponies are pretty hard on the ecosystem as well with overgrazing but ponies normally won't browse, they'll just graze, so they're sticking to those like low marsh spartina grasses and sedges and stuff, which Sika will use, but they also, especially on Assateague, where they're more in the like pine forest, they're mostly browsing. So I don't think there's a lot of competition between the two. But also that habitat is extremely novel as well, with all the different non-native large herbivore species there.
And I know this isn't a scientific source, but I have seen on like the Assateague wildlife photography pages that there have been people that have gotten images and videos of Sika interacting with, smaller pony family groups. I think they have some comfortability with each other to an extent.
Yeah. Sika are very curious. They
Yeah.
they oftentimes won't run away from you, or they'll even get closer to you before they like scream and then jump away. But they're pretty curious, so I can imagine that they would be hanging out with ponies.
Yeah, and don't forget to look up those vocalizations when you all hop off here. They're full of funny noises.
Are there any other questions for Andrew or Rebekah tonight? If not, here's the link for our raffle one more time. Just click on it so you'll have it. If you get inspired to get a raffle ticket or 100. And thank you. Thank you so much, Andrew and Rebekah. This has been a wonderful evening learning about the Sika deer and all of the wonderful work that you're doing to help move our needle forward in our understanding of this species. And so thank you for all that you do. We will have you back to talk about your additional research. So we'll put a date on the calendar for that. For everybody else, thanks for being here. Next week is the orchids of Calvert County. So come back and learn about the orchids of Calvert County. Till then, stay well, stay curious, stay outside, stay warm. See ya.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.